welcome to The Follow-Up, a podcast by Coram Deo Church. In this podcast, we break down the truths of Sunday and make them applicable for your everyday life.
Welcome to The Follow-Up, everyone. My name is Billy Glosson, and with me, as always, my trusty sidekick, Deacon of Coram Deo Music, Michael Tooley.
Hello, how's it going?
Oh, boy. So, hey, if you usually listen to the audio of this, guess what? We are attempting video now.
Just trying things out, trying new things.
So if you would rather see our shining faces sitting with headphones on, talking into microphones, you can do that. We're going to throw this up on our YouTube channel. So that's exciting, right?
Yeah, you get more of the full picture, like, the chemistry.
Yeah, there's things that you miss. There's jokes.
There's sight gags.
Yeah, like subtle, like little things here and there.
This is generally a very funny podcast.
Yeah, I mean, just rip-roaring ridiculousness. Hey, so we are continuing on through the Psalms of Ascent. This has been, and I said this last week, this has been easily one of my favorite sermon series since we launched the church. I mean,
yeah, I
love the Psalms, specifically the uniqueness of these Psalms taking us to the kind of like, again, taking us along this journey to worship, to celebrate, to the joy of being in God's presence is so rich. It's so good. I'm also reading for the first time, to my shame, the Pilgrim's Progress. I don't know if you've read like the OG 1600s.
Mm-mm.
Dude, it's borderline unreadable. I mean, I understand like there's value in it. Like I have a lot of the Puritan paperbacks and stuff up there, but I love reading the Puritans. It's work. You get so much good stuff out of it, but I am reading a modern translation and reading that coinciding with the Psalms of Ascent.
Is that version available somewhere else for anybody that might want to read it?
It is actually on the resource rack.
Oh, interesting.
Actually, the one that's on the resource rack is a little different than the one that I got.
Okay.
The one that is on the
I actually haven't read it either.
Okay, so
I've only heard like stories and illustrations.
If you don't know anything about the Pilgrim's Progress, and then we'll actually start talking about Sunday, Pilgrim's Progress is the story of a man named Christian. That's his new name. He finds a book, begins reading it. He lives in the city of destruction and realizes that the city of destruction is going to be destroyed. And so he makes a journey to the celestial city. It's a parable of the life of a believer, and it's really, really good. He runs into all kinds of interesting characters and situations.
Isn't there literally a character like called Folly or something like that?
Oh yeah, all the characters have they're very straightforward. Like one of the people he runs into is Mr. Worldly Wisdom.
There you go.
So it's definitely, not subtle. There's also, if you're like, hey, I'd love to read this with my kids instead of just myself, that's great because there's Little Pilgrim's Big Journey, which we're going to be getting some copies of for the resource shelf.
Very cool.
It's really good. The Bustles are reading it and love it. So there you go. All right. Well, let's talk about this Sunday, and we'll talk about the Psalm. So again, we've been going through the Psalms of Ascent, and this past Sunday we were in Psalm 124. Psalm 124 says, "If it had not been the Lord who was on our side, let Israel now say, if it had not been the Lord who was on our side, when people rose up against us, then they would have swallowed us up alive. When their anger was kindled against us, then the flood would have swept us away. The torrent would have gone over us. Then over us would have gone the raging waters. Blessed be the Lord, who has not given us as prey to their teeth. We have escaped like a bird from the snare of the fowlers. The snare is broken, and we have escaped it. Our help is in the name of the Lord, who made heaven and earth." So we talked on Sunday about this particular psalm being not a new idea, that the Lord is our help, right?
Yeah.
We talked about that this is not something that is this earth-shattering thing. We know this, we understand this, and yet, if we're not careful, we can miss, even though it's obvious, we can miss it. We can miss the joy and the call. And really, the frame of this psalm is a liturgy, which I'm sure you appreciated that as we talked about it. It's a prayer. It's a focused, guided call and response. And so you've got the first 5 verses as the call. And so this is, David saying, if it had not been for the Lord who was on our side, right? And he's saying, let Israel now say, hey, everyone, all of us, let's be in this together. So you've got the call, and most people would say, most scholars agree, that this is after Israel had warred against the Philistines. And so David is rejoicing and worshiping God for providing them the way of escape and victory. And then the response then is in verse 6. It says, "Blessed be the Lord." And it's a gristled response. We'll talk about that in a little bit. It's an honest, sober reality of like, hey, it wasn't easy, but we made it. And then the end, verse 8, kind of the benediction, the declaration is that our help is in the name of the Lord. So, Michael, when we look at this passage, and I look at it in retrospect, and I'm thinking about the call, and that it can be straightforward, it can be obvious. One of the things that's obvious as well is we went through this in the shadow of a national tragedy.
Yeah.
We were not even a full week removed from a grisly school shooting in Texas. And there's a temptation to read this psalm and to want to go into the defense. I immediately was like, let me think of some apologetic reasons against the problem of evil. Like, let's talk through this. But it just, something about it while I was working through this, it didn't feel like that's what this passage was. Right. And I was like, okay, God, I believe in expositional preaching. I believe in your word being timely and what we need.
Yeah.
And so I went to some different resources and help, and C.S. Lewis has this quote, and it's in his reflection on the Psalms. He says, "A man can't be always defending the truth. There must be time to feed on it."
Yeah. Yeah. C.S. Lewis, man.
He's got some bangers out there, some good ones.
Yeah. I have another quote that I wrote down from your message on Sunday. But yeah, one of the things I've loved about this series is you and I have talked a lot about, when we talk about, Coram Deo and we're planning and stuff, we've talked a lot about our core values and what we want to implement in our church. And it's so cool because we haven't preached a wholehearted message on gospel community.
Right.
It's loaded into this.
Yeah.
And so even that quote from Lewis as it pertains to this is just, you see this call in a moment like this where it is the task at hand for us as believers is to call one another to remember the Lord. And it's not a sidestep, and that's important. We're not saying, yeah, but it's like, no, this is necessary. This is our only hope.
Right.
And like you said, to feed on it, I wrote down, let the word nourish our souls. I wrote down gospel rehearsal. Like, there's just something to be said about, we go to the word for study. We go to the word so we can grow in our knowledge of God. But we go to receive life.
Right.
And so there comes a point, especially in the wake of tragedy, where it's like, you're just probably starving.
Yeah.
And this is the food. This is the bread of life.
This is what helps our hearts to actually cry Maranatha, right? So the end of Revelation is this hope, this longing for Revelation 21. We can't just zoom past that, right? We can't, if we're going to make it through tomorrow, we have to have something to hope in.
Yeah.
And the beauty of this psalm is David is saying, y'all, if it wasn't for the Lord who was on our side, we'd be toast. We would be shipwrecked. We'd be a mess. And that's the same with us. This is Ephesians, right? This is Ephesians 2. Like, hey, remember, you guys were sons of disobedience.
Right.
If it wasn't for Jesus showing up and changing you and reconciling you to the Father, your life would be forfeit. And that's why I think this is such a helpful, timely psalm, because the call is for you, it's for me, it's for all of us to really see and believe and rest in the truth. And that's hard to do. Man, it's hard to do, but it's so important. And I said Ephesians because in the early days of Coram Deo, when we were meeting and doing our preview gatherings, that was the first thing we went through, was the book of Ephesians. One day we'll go through it again. But man, I love Ephesians because so much of Ephesians is remember.
Yeah.
Man, it's so good.
One of the other things I wrote down when you were talking on Sunday was, without God, it would be so much worse.
Yeah.
And that's not trite. Like, that is the reality we live and breathe in. That is the common grace of God over encompasses our world in such a powerful way that many times in tragedy we'll ask, where was God? And every aspect, every beautiful moment in the wake of any kind of tragedy where, like, someone feels comforted, where someone feels a certain peace, a certain hope, that is exactly where God is.
Right.
And yeah, it is this reminder to us, like, hey, we do not grieve as those who are without hope.
Yeah.
So
that's good, man. So we started with the call, and then we move into the response. So verse 6 says, "Blessed be the Lord who has not given us prey to their teeth. We have escaped like a bird from the snare of the fowlers. The snare is broken, and we have escaped." I talked on Sunday kind of about this idea that we need to be people who practice gratitude and thankfulness. And I gave a very helpful example of praying through the Prayer of Examen, which is a really helpful ancient practice that helps us to reflect on either the day, week, or year, or month, or whatever you want to do. I think it's best, let me rephrase that. I think it's helpful to do it either for a day or week because it's so fresh, or at the end of a year. Those are really, really helpful times to look back on. But my question for you, Michael, is why are we so quick, or why are you so quick? And sometimes, I guess I could speak, since you can't speak for every person, why can it be that we can be so quick to move past gratitude?
Because I don't believe that God knows all my needs.
Wow.
And so I want to jump to that in my prayer. Like, hey, I know you know this, but do you know? Like, kind of thing. Like, ever since I received that challenge from you a while back, it's the most simple instruction to, okay, instead of, it's like, well, how do I practice gratitude? And you were just like, just thank God for literally anything that comes into your mind.
Yeah.
And I spent all of a 15-minute drive doing that one day.
Mm.
And it probably changed my week.
Yeah.
And I wrote that down too on Sunday. Gratitude requires practice. It does not come naturally.
Mm-hmm.
There are some people that are, generally speaking, like way more thankful than I am, or joyful, vibrant people.
Than me as well. Yeah.
Yeah. But I'm sure they still have to practice. I'm sure they struggle in other areas. But for most of us, I think it's pretty common that, like, this is not a natural thing, where we're just like, especially in the midst of trials. And you said this 2 weeks ago in your last sermon, that this isn't just like kind of trying to change your mind. This is a reorientation of the heart.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wrote down from Vincent, God is forcing my trials to bow to his gospel purpose.
So good.
That we don't see with the eyes of God. This was also from your last sermon, so double down, follow up, of like, he has the perspective that we don't. His ways are not our ways.
Yeah.
And so I think when it comes to this practice of gratitude, it is a walking in faith. It's taking a step forward down the path that is, what if I trusted God a little bit more today?
Mm.
That, like, he knows, he sees, and he is with me. And this trial now is not punitive. This trial, he is like, this is going to form and shape you into such a holiness and a higher purpose and life-giving joy that you can't imagine.
Mm.
I'm going to make this trial bow to my gospel purpose. When you face that grace, that enables gratitude.
Yeah.
Now I'm saying thank you for every little thing.
Mm.
And as you're doing it, this is the crazy thing. The spy in the heart, the Holy Spirit is like, and that, and that, and that, and that person, like, it starts to just like overflow. Like, now I'm okay. Now I can see all the things I'm grateful for.
Yeah.
So
that's great, man. So again, there's so much more that we could say, and we walked through a little bit more with the Prayer of Examen. But I think a really helpful place for you, it's hey, it's a Tuesday, Billy. I'm trying to think about, how do I apply the sermon? Again, a really simple way to do it is to, one, remember, right? Which we do that by preaching the gospel to ourselves, getting in the Word of God, and then practice gratitude. Rehearse this truth over and over and over again and again. This morning, I was trying to get a little bit of work done at the house. I had an idea, and I'm the type of person that if I don't get it done right then, often it'll escape. And even with like to-do systems and stuff, I'm just like, this isn't going to take long. I'm just going to do it. And so I sat down and started doing it. And my son, Sam, just like waddled over to me.
But then he gave you like the most time to focus.
Yeah,
right?
he was like, "Oh, Dad, you're busy.
Oh, you're working.
No big deal. No,
I'll get to you later."
He's 16 months old. He was pushing a book into my lap, and I didn't want to read to him because I was trying to do this. I was like, "Not now, buddy, not now." And so he went and read with Mom. And I remember just walking away from that and being like, "Man, I'm so quick to like want to zoom past the fact that my son wants to spend time with me and like loves his dad." And just like wants to sit in my lap and read the same books over and over again and enjoy them and delight in them. And when I take those moments and I actually reflect on them and say, okay, I have so much to be grateful for in this moment. And I can get so lost in what needs to be done and all the tasks that are before me, or I can pause, stop, and see all that God has given and be more of a Mary that sits at the feet of Jesus and abides and rests in him than a Martha that feels like I have to do a ton. And so that's the challenge, I think, for all of us is how do we slow down? How do we pause? How do we reflect? How do we practice the rhythms of gratitude? And this is a great place to do that, to say, hey, be intentional. Start writing out the things that you're grateful for. Start speaking them, whatever comes to your heart or your mind. And just watch how God uses that in a massive way.
Well, in that story, like what a beautiful shadow of like God our Father who doesn't turn us away, who is like eager, like, yeah, let's hang out.
Mm-hmm.
It's just such a encouraging thing. And like that we would be more like your kiddo.
Yeah.
It's just like, hey, I just, like we've read this before. I like you a lot.
Yeah.
Can we hang out?
Please read the same book for the 7th time this morning.
I just want to hear your voice.
Yeah. It's awesome, man. And so the last thing we see here, to kind of land the plane is the declaration, which is verse 8. Our help is in the name of the Lord who made heaven and earth. And so, Michael, I guess not a really an application question, but just a specific question for you. How does that verse comfort you? That our help is in the name of the Lord who made heaven and earth.
I was blessed to preach on the Psalm a couple weeks ago of, I lift my eyes up to the hills. Where does my help come from? Packed into that declaration of confidence is like its own reminder.
Yeah.
I had a job interview today, and maybe we should edit that out.
Nah, it's okay. You had a job interview, and it was great.
It was great. And but as I was sitting in the lobby waiting for this interview to start, I thought that. I was like kind of nervous. I was like, my help comes from the God of the universe.
Yeah.
Who speaks life into existence. What should I be afraid of? Nothing. And that, I think our temptation is to play the yeah, but game and just be like, you don't know, like what I'm going through. And like, can it really be that simple?
Right.
It really is that simple. It
Yeah.
really is just saying like, who is my helper? It's God.
That's
He's
so
with
good,
me.
man. You know, what's funny is that you said this and this just clicked for me. Often what happens is, as good Reformed theologians will play the theological chess match of like, well, yeah, but God uses and can use suffering. And so it might not work out and it might be for my suffering so that God could, let those trials come so they refine my character and they produce steadfast hope. And that's all true and good and fine and A+ on Noah and James. But these promises are in Scripture for a reason because the sovereign God of the ages saw fit to put Romans 8 and all of these slew of Psalms in the Word for us to know and abide in and practice those promises.
So we're down here doing theological trigonometry.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, hey, why don't you just come to the table and eat?
Yep. Why don't you just hop up in my lap and let's read the same book again?
Why don't you let me worry about being God?
Yeah.
And like how I work.
So good. Guys, our help is in the name of the Lord who made heaven and earth. And that is unbelievably.
There is no greater hope. There's no greater peace.
It's the best news ever. It's so good. So I want to encourage you, rest in this truth today. Believe in this truth. Walk in it. Well, as always, we want to give you guys good resources. And so two resources that I pointed out a lot in the sermon. The first one is we went through the Prayer of Examen. That will go up with this podcast. You can just go down to the show notes if you're watching, or, if you're listening on your phone, on Spotify or Apple, whatever, just look at the show notes. We'll have a link to the Prayer of Examen. That's a great practice that you can do automatically. The second is a great book that I'm rediscovering is A Gospel Primer, or Primer, depending on who you ask. The audiobooks is Primer, by the way. It's by Milton, Vincent. It's so, so good. We had a few copies on the resource table. We're going to have to order some more, but it is amazing. If you don't have a copy and you don't want to wait, go ahead and hop online and pick up a copy. It's so great. That's all we got this week. We'll catch you guys next time.
Yeah, later.
Thanks again for listening to the follow-up. To learn more about Coram Deo, you can check us out on our website at coramdeonc.com or follow us on social media at Coram Deo NC. You can listen to this podcast, check out some sermons and other things anywhere you find podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, and now you can watch us on YouTube as well as you listen to this podcast and maybe want to watch me and Michael talk at each other or whoever else we have on. Who knows? All right, y'all. Take care. Have a great day. See ya.
End of podcast.